Hi guys, welcome back to the DrCliff AuD vlog. This is vlog number 120, and I have to say, first right off the bat, happy Mother's Day, Mom. Today is Mother's Day in the United States. It really should be Mother's Day around the world because moms are awesome. Mom, you are included in that comment, and I will be calling you later today, I promise. But today's topic is actually not going to be about Mother's Day. It is going to be about Eargo and this massive settlement that they had with the Department of Justice. But before I get into that topic, if you could do me a huge favor and click the like button. As you know, it really helps out my channel. And if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, what the heck are you waiting for? I release new videos all the time, and if you have the subscribe button clicked and the notification bell clicked, you get a notification every single time I publish a new video. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this settlement of Eargo with the Department of Justice. So Eargo agrees to pay $34.37 million to settle the common law and False Claims Act allegations for unsupported diagnosis codes. So I've published a couple videos on this. I think one like vlog video maybe a couple months back when this was all announced, and then a couple of YouTube shorts and stuff like that. But I think like a week ago, we finally heard that there was a settlement in this case. So this is actually really good news, and I'll explain why. Eargo has been dealing with this kind of questionable interaction with the federal employee program with submitting for insurance benefits for their direct-to-consumer hearing aids, their online hearing aids, right? And it has really been taking a huge hit on their stock price over the course of the time as this thing has developed. Well, here just recently, they were able to reach this settlement like a week ago with the Department of Justice. So they finally kind of just like have all of this behind them, but there are some ramifications from it, as well as a little bit more insight into actually what was going on with this. So obviously this is a huge amount of money that they settled on, but this is basically, they're not admitting guilt as to doing anything wrong. That's what happens when you settle. Now, I'm not a legal person, so I might be a little bit off on some of the things that I say here based on all of the information that I've read. But according to the Department of Justice, they take this obviously as a huge victory because they feel like Eargo is doing fraudulent billing methods and basically submitting unsupported diagnosis codes. So anytime that you go in and get a hearing test, you will get a diagnosis for whatever the hearing loss is that you have. And there are a variety of different diagnosis codes that can be come up with. So the most common one I would say is H90.3, which is bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. But the thing with these direct-to-consumer, like over-the-counter online hearing aid companies, is that if they are going to be submitting claims to an insurance to get reimbursement from that insurance, they have to submit a diagnosis code of some form. And here's the thing, when you buy these hearing aids online, like you're not going anywhere to get a hearing test. There's no requirement that you get a hearing test. They could say, hey, go get a hearing test. But if you don't have a hearing test and you don't have a diagnosis for what your hearing loss is, what are you supposed to submit to an insurance company? Well, they were submitting one of two codes. Either they were submitting H90.5, which is unspecified sensorineural hearing loss. So this is when you don't really know what type of hearing loss that it is, but it doesn't change the fact that you actually have to receive this diagnosis from someone who can diagnose you with it. Like you can't just fill this in on a form and submit it to an insurance company and expect to get payments. Now, that is with my understanding. Of course, there could be a whole different understanding and reasoning for actually doing this submission. I didn't see anywhere in my readings from Eargo why they felt like it was okay to do this. But they had, I imagine people internally who were totally cool with doing this and felt like it was okay to do, I presume. Maybe they just got bad advice from a healthcare lawyer or something like that. Who knows? The other code that they were submitting was H91.93, which is unspecified hearing loss bilateral. So again, it's one of those we don't really know what the type of hearing loss is, but let's just put this diagnosis code down so we can get approval to, receive insurance benefit. Now, I have to imagine that the federal employee program run by Blue Cross Blue Shield was starting to get a zillion of these because they were their biggest third-party payer for Eargo. And they were probably getting all these diagnosis codes being like, why are we getting all these like unspecified, diagnosis codes? I mean, wouldn't you think that majority of these individuals would get like an actual diagnosis of sensorineural hearing loss or conductive hearing loss or mixed hearing loss or something like that lets you know exactly what it is, and they weren't getting that. So I have to imagine that that's kind of what raised the red flag over a year ago at this point. I think we're over a year ago at this point when this whole thing started happening. But, as I look at, Eargo here recently, I think their stock price is down to like $2.24 or something like that. And it was up in like the 70s, a year back. And they have just had a horrible, horrible tumble from their highs. And it's really all due to this insurance thing. Now, the company is restructuring to be able to go without accepting insurance. So I'm pretty sure that they laid off people. They kind of reformulated how they're doing things in their company and focusing on the private pay individuals, basically individuals who are not using insurance to pay for these devices. Now, they did not rule out, Eargo did not rule out actually starting to accept insurance benefits again, and particularly from the federal employee program, right? So it's potential that they could have discussions and be like, okay, what do we have to do to make sure we're compliant with this and be able to get insurance benefits for patients again? And, I think it's critical, to be honest with you. I think that it's going to be very difficult for Eargo moving forward if they do not have the ability to accept insurance payment for these devices. I mean, this company, I think they said that their burn rate of how much cash they spend each quarter is like $20 to $25 million, somewhere in that range. And then of course you have this $34 million settlement on top of that. And that is a lot of money that leaves the company. They need to make sure that they are getting some private pay sales in order to keep this engine moving. Otherwise, things are not going to be good for this company moving forward. Now, if you guys saw my review video of the most recent Eargo 6 hearing aids, I was actually pretty impressed with them compared to previous generation devices that they've had. So this company has shown that they can actually do technological innovation from a hearing aid standpoint. The question becomes is, are they going to be able to be alive long enough to get it to the point where these hearing aids are truly legitimate in the scope of direct-to-consumer hearing aids for the price point that they're at? Because, when you compare them to the Bose hearing aids, which is a totally different story, I get it, because they are just shutting their doors for that whole program. But when you compare the Bose hearing aids being at like $900 for a pair, and you've got these for being, $3,000 or over $3,000 for a pair of hearing aids from Eargo, they're on the expensive side, so they had better work extremely well. And I still don't feel like they're quite there yet. But the reason I don't feel like they're quite there is more to do with it's impossible to follow best practices when getting a hearing aid from online. Now, I can have patients come into my clinic, and I've done this for Eargo. Patients come into my clinic and they have Eargo hearing aids and they want to make sure that they're set up the best way possible. So I actually run them through real ear verification and all of that, and make sure that they know how to do maintenance on their own hearing aids, and make sure that their hearing aids are actually set up to the best setting that they can possibly have, and they end up having a little bit more success with those devices for a period of time, right? And so I'm a fan of direct-to-consumer hearing aids because I do believe that it increases access and awareness and affordability, and I think that's an important thing. And I think that Eargo has shown, at least up until now, that from a technological standpoint, that they can be a serious player inside of this market. And I think that if you asked Eargo, and I know several people at Eargo, and I like the people that I know at Eargo, I think that if you ask them, I think that they would feel like they have a very robust technology there. They just need to figure out a way to get people to want to spend money on those devices at that price point without having to use their insurance. And they, like I said, I think they really need to figure that out. Now, there is something else that's looming over Eargo. And I've spoken with several individuals about this, not necessarily at Eargo, but the idea of a class action lawsuit by investors. With this whole thing and with this settlement, I don't believe that it is an admission of liability on Eargo's behalf. But it can't look good in terms of them settling this and then having all these upset investors who, had purchased stock, either during the IPO or whatever, before the IPO or whatever, people who had invested in this company, and then because of these perceived fraudulent activities that Eargo was undergoing, that it drove the stock price like into the ground. They are down like 93% since their initial IPO, or at least since the high, because they were at like $70 some and now they're at like $2. And this company cannot go much lower. And I don't know how much money that they have left to be able to weather another lawsuit like this. Maybe they can, maybe they can't, but they're going to have to raise more money somehow. And I don't know how they're going to do that. It's kind of a tricky thing for Eargo. And like I said, I do want to see Eargo kind of come out of this, right? I want them to get all of this stuff behind them so they can just focus on like being a part of this over-the-counter hearing aid market when it becomes official, whenever the FDA guidelines, the final guidelines come out, right? But it is good to see that this Department of Justice investigation is settled. They don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't have to hopefully report on it anymore. And we can just all kind of put it behind us, because at the end of the day, the goal that I have and that you probably have is just make sure that we're all hearing better, right? Like, that's the ultimate goal. And if Eargo can play a role in people hearing better, then we absolutely want them to be around to help us do that. So that is really all I wanted to talk about today. I know it's really kind of just like let's just get this out of the way and never really talk about it again. And maybe you found this interesting, maybe you didn't. Regardless, I feel like it's important to understand what's going on in the world of hearing healthcare, because things are changing like crazy. And this probably isn't the last time that we'll see a company have to go through these learning curves, because this is such a new market when you really think about it, and everything becoming, as legitimate as we can possibly make it online. But nonetheless, that is enough of my rambling for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, make sure that you hit that like button. And as always, I'll see you next week.